We started on the first week. We talked about entering the narrow gate, and we said Jesus is the narrow gate, which means He's the only Lord and God. He's the only way to the Father, and you will have to divest yourself of any other source of salvation except Him alone. And finally, when you enter the narrow gate, the way is hard. Talaga. The way of a disciple, the way of following Jesus is hard. And then on the second week, it got more difficult. We said, we need to forsake all competing priorities. That however much we love our families, however much we love our brothers, our sisters, our parents, or even our wife and children, if at some point, your love for them should, if at some point God challenges you, which in their time it happened, that they needed to choose between their family and following Christ, we need to forsake all competing priorities, no close seconds. Walang malapit na pumapangalawa sa priority ni Jesus sa buhay natin. Such that, even the other Gospels would say, unless you hate your family and so on. The idea is that your love for God is so big such that our seeming love for a family would look like hatred in comparison. Grabe, sino makakagawa niyan? And ang ending natin, this is a call to love. This is a response to love. The reason why we'd forsake all competing priorities, because God's greatness and goodness is so wonderful and great, and it's just everything else pales in comparison when it comes to value. That what seems to be valuable to you now compared to the glory of God, it is really nothing. So in fact, this call to follow Jesus is an invitation to a loving relationship. And in fact, we want to go beyond yung iniisip natin usually, na parang yung mga yan, standard siya na dapat i-meet. Kailangan ginawa mo to para ma-follow mo si Jesus. That's not even the tone or the posture that we're bringing this whole thing. In fact, it's more of a challenge. Let this be your pursuit. And I love how this particular passage opens in that way, about the pursuit that we have for God. Let's begin with this first part. He said in verse 23, and He said to all. Now, Jesus was not just speaking to the disciples here. He was speaking to everyone, the whole crowd. Which means this, He is giving this invitation to everyone, not for a select few, but for everyone. Which means all of us have, in a sense, equal access to the privilege of counting the cost in order to follow Jesus. Each one, hindi mo pwedeng sabihin, wala naman ako natanggap na invitation. No. The invitation has been given to you too. And this is for everyone. Meron kasi silang strong commitment. Kaya magfa-follow sila kay Jesus. The same opportunity that was given to them is the same opportunity that's being given to you, pero the next phrase will now differentiate us. At dito nagkakaiba. It says there, and He said to all, if anyone would come after me. If anyone would come after me. The standards by which what is asked of us in order to follow Jesus, those are not forced on you at all. They're not forced on you. I mean, you hear the phrase counting the cost, right? Counting the cost. Okay. Pag sinabi pong counting the cost, si Jesus din actually ang unang nagbanggit nun. Tapos He gave two examples. Sabi niya, kapag halimbawa maibibuild ka na building, dapat kinount mo na yung cost. Magkano bang kailangan para ma-build yung building na yan? So that you will be able to finish it. And then He gives another example. If you're going to go to war with an army of 10,000 and you only have 3,000, you should count the cost. I mean, are you really gonna go to sure defeat? So the idea is, if you're beginning to follow Jesus, if your desire, if anyone would come after Jesus, then He is giving this as a cost right from the beginning. Count the cost at the start so that you will finish the race properly, so that you will finish your race here on earth in a strong manner. It's almost like Jesus is saying, you know what? You have to front load the cost already so that you'll make sure na tama ba talaga? Are you really sure about following Christ? Are you really sure about pursuing Christ? And then Jesus would now say, if anyone would come after me. The picture there, the idea of would, it's like a desire. If anyone desires, In fact, yan pong word na ginamit niya sa wood, yung next level niya pa ay delight. If anyone delights to come after me, the invitation for us is not something that we're forced to. This is for us, for you and me who would say, Lord, I really want to live for you. God, nasubukan ko na lahat sa mundong to. I've tried everything in this life. And Lord, I really want to live for you. I like this quote from Jim Carrey. Spoken in an interview. Sabi, I hope everybody could get rich and famous and will have everything they ever dreamed of, so they will know that it's not the answer. Lord, I've tried everything. I've tried everything, and yet, God, when I found you, finally, something substantial, finally, something real, finally, an answer to the peace that I was looking for. Finally, Lord, your beauty is unimaginable. You've experienced God already. Now, I pray that the invitation, you'd be able to receive it. The invitation is that you would delight, desire to come after. The idea of coming after is a pursuit. You're not being led grudgingly. Para kang tinalian sa electa, sinabi, oh, ayan na, sumunod ka na kay Christ. It's almost like you're a horse and then you're being pulled, being forced to follow the owner or the master. No, I pray that it would change. I pray begin to see this as, Lord, your invitation is an invitation to desire to be with you. It's an invitation to delight in you. It's an invitation to pursue you. So if you do not have that, if you're not yet there, if you're not yet in that place, na you're not, parang I don't want to even pursue God, then don't worry. This message is not for you na. You're free and clear. And you don't need to come back next week. Yes, but if the Lord has put you in a place that you've already experienced, you've already tasted a bit that the Lord is good, and that you know that true life is really in Him, and that you've tried everything else in this world, and that there's nothing else, no one else who could actually give the solutions to the things that you go through, or you've seen things that you've acquired in this life to be empty. If you've already at that place, then I tell you this, let's go all in. Come on. Wag ka nang mag-reserve. Wag ka nang mag-withhold. Ibigay mo na to lahat kay Lord. Go ahead and follow Him. Bakit? Kasi it does not make sense that if He is Lord and I'm not following Him completely, come on. You've already come to the realization that Jesus is the Son of God, that He is Lord. He is who He claims Himself to be. And because you've already encountered God, what prevents you? What prevents you from giving it your all and just pursuing Him completely? In fact, that's exactly what we're going to talk about again today. What prevents you? But first, settle in your heart. Do you delight to come after Christ? Do you desire to pursue Him? Can you feel it inside of you? The Lord, I really just want to live my life for you. God, it's the least I could do. You gave your life for me. You changed my life. You set me on the right path. Lord, it's the least I could do. I want to live completely for you. And then He gives 3 imperatives or commands. Let him deny himself. Let him take up his cross daily. Let him follow me. Yun po yung 3 hihimayin natin ngayon. Ano bang ibig sabihin ng deny myself? Ano bang ibig sabihin ng take up my cross? Tsaka daily talaga? Daily? Really? Bakit kailangan daily? Bakit hindi pwedeng weekly o kaya monthly lang? Bakit kailangan daily? Tapos finally, to follow Jesus, what exactly does that mean? Lord, tulungan niyo kami as we dive into this now. So let's begin with the first one. Let him deny himself. Every one of us had certain goals in our lives for which you sacrificed. Meron kang certain goal. For example, you want to be able to graduate with a certain laude. So because that goal was very clear, you denied yourself. You denied yourself certain gimmicks with a barkada. You denied yourself many movies because you were studying. You denied yourself certain, vacations. You denied yourself certain pleasures. You denied yourself extra sleep in order for a certain goal to be met. There's a very strong pursuit that was enough reason for you to deny yourself. If I tell you right now, sasabihin ko sa iyo, oy, kailangan mo na mag-give up ng iyong donuts. What? Why will I give up my donuts? Okay. Para, imaginein mo ang sarili mo, 20 pounds lighter. Tapos biglang inisip mo yung 20 pounds. Tapos naalala mo yung itsura mo noon. Oo nga, worth it na mag-give up ng donut. The idea of denying self is not stand alone. It's for a reason. It's because you're coming after Christ. What if I told you that there are certain things we do with our lives. There are certain things we tolerate in our lives that's preventing you from experiencing God. That's preventing you from living all out for God. That's preventing you from experiencing the opportunities that God is about to give you. That's preventing you from hearing from God clearly so that you can actually follow Him. What if I told you there were certain things that you need to shed off in order to do that? You'd probably say, you're right, I'm delighting in God. I would like to come after Him. I'm pursuing Him. Sige, pag-usapan natin, ano ba kasi yung mga yan? Ano bang kailangan kong i-let go? Ano bang kailangan kong i-deny? Unang-una, well, actually hindi unang-una, ang kailangan mong i-deny ang iyong sarili. I will deny myself. Alright. Let's try to look at that. Okay. So, when it comes to body, alam mo, katawan ko, part siguro ng kailangan ko i-deny would be sin. Yes. Any sinful acts, alright? Sinful thoughts, sinful emotions, okay? Sinful will or direction, okay, all right. I'm going to let go of sin. Yes, all right, I will deny myself. Part of being a disciple and following the narrow, and entering through the narrow gate and the way that is hard, is that you won't be able to experience the broad gate and way. Hindi mo mararanasan yung malawak na daanan. Kasi yung malawak na daanan, no restrictions. No restrictions. You can live however you want. No restrictions. And you can still choose that. Come on. You still can. The only problem is that it leads to destruction. It does. And you've experienced a measure of that in your life already when you were walking that broad way. But now that you've surrendered your life to Christ, the path that's before you, full of restrictions. Teka lang, parang nakaka-restrict, nakaka-restrain, nakaka-constrain, napaka-limited. No. You're not missing out. Don't worry. You're being restricted from sin. You're being restricted from destruction. You're being restricted from the things that would rob you of life. You're not missing out on anything. There are constraints and restraints that you personally put on your life because you are denying yourself in order to pursue Christ. It could be anything small like coming to church on time and preparing ahead so that you'll arrive here on time. That can be a denying self in order to experience the worship, in order for you to connect with God and be able to receive, just the full benefit of the fellowship as we come together. It could be something bigger like certain practices you do in the office. That's a matter of a lack of integrity. It could be something, probably a distraction in your life. At some point, God had to speak to me to delete Netflix from my iPad because it's distracting already. Netflix is back in my iPad. My children are watching from it. So, but during that time, I remember I had to remove it because it was a distraction. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it was distracting me. Or it could be something really big, a particular life direction that is in rebellion to God. A particular preference, a particular choice, a particular big pursuit area that's not really pleasing to the Lord. What will you need to deny in order for you to be able to experience God fully? What must it be? Let me give a few examples. These 3 examples on the screen, they're actually good things. Self-determination, self-reliance, and self-care. Now, they all contain the word self. So let's see. Okay nga lang ba itong mga to? Self-determination means kaya mong manindigan at magdesisyon. That's a good thing. Yung pag tinanong ka, saan tayo kakain? Kahit saan. Ano yung susuot mo ngayon? Di ko alam. Okay, anong plano mo sa buhay? Wala. Okay, that's not self-determination at all. Self-determination is, come on, make a decision. Get a definition of your life. Learn to understand what your direction, what clarity is. So, saan tayo kakain? Sa McDonald's. Anong isusuot mo? Something yellow. Okay, anong direction mo sa buhay? This and this and this and that. That's self-determination. When you're faced with a decision, you can make the decision. That's a good thing. The problem is when self-determination becomes self-will instead of God's will. At that point, you know what must give. You'll have to deny your self-will. The second one is self-reliance. Now, we want that. We want you to learn to, we want you to learn to stand up on your own 2 feet. I mean, you're already 25. Come on. Di ba? Maghanap ka na ng trabaho. Dapat kumikita ka na ng maayos or something like that. Or, self-reliant. Pag merong sitwasyon, especially for us as men, hindi ba pwedeng lalamya-lamya ka? Come on. Man up in this particular situation. God called you to lead. God called you to be a leader. So, get, in the US, they say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Right? And then, come on, get your game on. Self-reliance. But when self-reliance becomes independence from God, that's where we draw the line. You do not want to be independent of God. Self-reliance, a quick example is that when you go through your day without prayer. Going through your day without prayer is like saying, Lord, I got this. Hindi ko na kayo kailangan, Lord. Kaya ko naman. Alam ko lahat ng mga gagawin ko ngayong araw na to. Huwag nyo na akong pakialaman. Bless nyo na lang ako, okay? So, pero no prayer, no dependence, no acknowledgement of God's wisdom or guidance. You're just going at it on your own. Independence from God. Self-reliance is good in terms of how you take responsibility for your own life, but not to be independent from the Lord. The third example is self-care. Especially in this day, madalas yung pinag-uusapan. You need to care for yourself. Tama naman. Tama naman talagang alagaan ng sarili. In fact, I'd even give you a passage. Ephesians 5:29 would say this, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it. So, the idea of nourishing and cherishing yourself to make sure that you are well taken care of, right? The idea of self-care is, I need this, give yourself a break, come on. Hindi naman pwedeng 10 to 12 hours ang trabaho mo araw-araw, tapos wala ka man lang off, wala ka man lang Sabbath. Tapos hindi ka man lang gumagawa ng mga bagay that would refresh you. Hindi ka nag-unwind. Wala kang pinupurso na hobby. Wala kang pinupurso na interest. Puro ka lang trabaho. No life. Come on. You need to take care of yourself too. But, not as an excuse to tolerate certain things in your life. Hindi kasi, wag mo akong pakialaman. Ito yung gusto kong gawin kasi this is how I care for myself. If it borders on the sinful, immediately teka lang, hindi na yan self-care. That's indulgence. That's self-indulgence. I might need to deny myself that if it's already indulging myself in it. Let me give you a small example of how sometimes this particular generation indulges themselves. And if I may, as I say this, it's going to be I'm going to go out on a limb here, and some of you might cancel me, and that's okay. But I have to say this. Sometimes we allow our thoughts and our emotions just to run free and not put a check on them. All in the context of, this is me, this is who I am, and I must be true to myself. That my emotions need to be validated, even if they sometimes or often are wrong ones already. Pero wag mo akong pakialaman kasi inaalagaan ko ang sarili ko, and you just gotta, I indulge myself in these things. I'd like to mention this passage in Psalm 119, let the words of my mouth, that's understood, right? Mga sinasabi ko dapat maayos. And the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord. Let the meditation of my heart, most of the emotional and the mental health situations that we go through is because of thoughts and emotions running amok. That they're just there unbridled. And we nurture them, and we feel them, and it brings us to a downward spiral of feeling and feeling and feeling when they're no longer acceptable in God's sight. If there is a negative emotion, I'll give an example, worry. I understand. Marami kang pinagdadaanan, but worry? Jesus already said, do not worry. Worry is a sin. So will you continue to tolerate that in your heart, in your mind, when it is not acceptable in God's sight? But I want to acknowledge it. Totoo naman talaga, marami akong pinagdadaanan. You're right, but worry is a distrust of God's sovereignty over your life. So will you really continue to tolerate it in you, self-indulgence? That I must deny myself of because worry does not belong here. Another example, self-pity. Wala talaga akong kwenta. Wala talaga akong pag-asa. Ayaw na nila sa akin. Ganyan naman talaga sila. Wala nang nag-aasikaso. Wala man lang nagki-care. Understand? And when you get to think about those things, at some point, that has got to be checked. Because that is not from the Lord. Remember, what we feel and what we think, the enemy can sow into that too. For example, thoughts. Your thoughts can come from the Word, from God, from the world, from other people, from yourself, or from the enemy. And often, these negative thoughts and emotions running amok in our hearts and in our minds are thoughts that the enemy sows in order to destroy you. Would you be willing to say, Lord, I want to deny myself of that emotion. I want to deny myself of that fantasizing in my mind. I want to deny myself of that wrong pattern of thought that no one cares for me, because that's how it is to follow Jesus. At that point, there's a passage in 1 Corinthians 10 that says, you take captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ. 1 Corinthians 10, I mean. Take captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ. Let the meditations of my heart be pleasing, be acceptable to you, my Lord and my Redeemer. Does that make sense? Hopefully some of you, I know there's a place for official or professional intervention. But some of us simply need to carry out the basic denying ourselves of the continuation of those thoughts and of those emotions. Let me give a sort of a scientific proof for this. Dr. Taylor from Harvard, proposed, or rather coming out of studies, came up with this 90-second rule. Ito yung observation nila. Every time there's a trigger of whatever, nakita mo yung kinakainisan mo. So dahil doon, biglang nainis ka. Nakita mo siya eh. The actual substances in your brain that mediate that particular encounter only last for 90 seconds. The physiologic part. The biological part. What happens after 90 seconds is on you. Then why is it that bakit galit pa rin ako hanggang ngayon, 30 years na? Okay, tama ka. Ang tagal na nung 90 seconds mo, umabot na ng 30 years. Galit ka pa rin talaga. Pero naintindihan ko yan. Maraming mga ganyan na sitwasyon. Because after the 90 seconds, there's nothing anymore. Na-flush out na yung substances, yung hormones. Kung ano man yung mga na-release, na-flush out na. Pero we keep on kicking them up because we continue the thought. We continue to nurture the heart. Instead of responding to what the Bible says, forgive. Right here, right now. Don't wait any longer. Wag mo nang further nurture. It is like it's like destruction and rottenness in your soul. Forsake rage and anger. Do not tolerate it anymore. Deny yourself in that area. Forgive. So that the 90 seconds would be cut and then there's no longer any downward spiral. Again, all of that to say, as a response to the extremes of self, we deny self. We deny self. Now, you could go on and think further. Ano pang mga iba pang pwedeng ibig sabihin niyan? Pero I hope you get a bit of the picture. There are certain things that we tolerate in our lives that are preventing us, in our personal lives, that are preventing us from being able to follow Jesus wholeheartedly. What must you do? Deny self. I love the second part. It's even more difficult. The idea of taking up your cross daily. What does taking up your cross daily mean? Interestingly, that's verse 23, right? In verse 22, Jesus would speak about death. He said, I'm going to go to Jerusalem, I'm going to die. So, finortel niya na yung kanyang death, tas sa kanya biglang sasabihin, you must take up your cross. All right, so what exactly does the cross mean? It talks about death. The cross is a symbol of death. And when I say I take up my cross, eto siya. Would I be willing to deny myself, the wrong directions that myself take? Would I be willing to deny myself to the point of even giving up my life? Because that's a different thing. I mean, if I will deny myself now, for example, of a lot of food in order for me to go to the gym, buff up, and get healthy, great. I mean, okay lang yung denying self kasi temporary yun. I mean, makakain naman ako makakain ako ng ibang bagay. Pero yung to deny myself to the point of death, that's sort of permanent. Come on, if I give myself up, if I'd say, mababangga ka, ako na lang mababangga, sa halip na ikaw, tapos itutulak mo siya, tapos ikaw yung mababangga, ikaw yung namatay, you died, you took up your cross, you died, that's sort of permanent. Parang, am I even willing to do that? Yeah, but Jesus said it, so how do we make sense of that now? There's a passage in Galatians 2:20 that says, I have been crucified with Christ and I no longer live. The idea there is this, that you would count yourself dead along with Christ, and you no longer live, but Christ lives in you. So, when Jesus would say, take up your cross daily, He's actually saying, you have got to give your whole life up. Count the cost now, so that it's almost like saying, pag nagbayad ka na ng 1 million ngayon, pag siningil ka pa ng 10,000 along the way, madali mo na mababayaran yon. Make sense? If I give up my life now, and if later on 10 years down the road, there would be a girl who would flirt with me, let's say an office mate, then I'd be able to say no to that because it's just worth 10,000 pesos compared to the fact that I already gave up my life right at the beginning of my walk with God that was worth 1 million to me. Make sense? So as we progress in life, importante na ito yung starting point. We've already died. And it's in the past tense. I have been crucified with Christ. For those of us who have entered the narrow gate, you've been crucified with Christ. You no longer live, but Christ lives in you. You've died. And you'd have to get reminded daily. Why daily? Because from the surrender comes the empowerment to live for Christ. From the surrender comes the empowerment to live for Christ. That last part that says, follow me. The idea of being able to follow Jesus. No one is ever able to do that consistently and perfectly. But if you surrender daily, then you will receive grace for the day. You are reminded that your life has already been given to God. So dahil doon, that particular day, Lord, I have grace for the day. I'm reminded, I'm going to live for Christ today. I consider myself dead. I've been crucified with Christ. I've taken up my cross today. Lord, I want to live for you alone today. The daily reminder is important for your empowerment in terms of being able to follow Jesus wholeheartedly. The way to follow Him, that call that says, come follow me, comes from the idea, the empowerment to do that comes from your daily surrender. So, to conclude this part, every week we talk about the cost of following Jesus. If you remember, during the first week, the cost of following Jesus was entering through the narrow gate and following the way that is hard. Meaning, recognizing that Jesus is the only way to the Father. Jesus is the only source of salvation. Not everyone will choose Him, but you've done it. You've chosen Him. So that's the cost of following Jesus. You're willing to forsake every other philosophy, every other ideology, every other thinking in our minds of ways to be able to come to God. We've trusted in Jesus completely. That's the first cost of discipleship, week 1. The second cost of discipleship, week 2, we talked about wealth, riches. Just like the rich young ruler, would you be willing to dissociate yourself from anything that the world has on you? We also talked about relationships, loved ones. And finally, we talked about persecution, which we're going to revisit next week. That was the cost of following Jesus. Today, it's pretty straightforward. The cost of following Jesus would be to deny yourself, to take up your cross daily, and then follow Him. With the time that we have remaining, I'd like to talk to you about not counting the cost. What if you don't count the cost? Pwede naman. Pwede talaga. In fact, as we told you, you're not being coerced to deny yourself, take up your cross daily, and follow Jesus. The call is given to anyone who would come after me. That this is a pursuit of God. And I pray that that is where you'll come from as you make your decision in relation to what we're talking about today. If you would opt not to count the cost, it would be like saving your life, but then still eventually losing it. We talked about the dash, I think last week. Sabi natin, let's say, John Naron, 1976 to 2076. I lived for 100 years. I mean, wow, ayos, 100 years. And then, if this is the dash of my life, and this is the rest of eternity, and then I'd have everything here in this world. I'd be able to preserve this life. I would be able to get everything here. I mean, I would have all the riches, the fame, the power, the females, and everything. Sorry. 4 Fs, alam niyo na yan? Fame, ayan, yeah, fame, fortune, power, and females. The 4 Fs, ayan, yan. So, yeah, nakuha ko na lahat yan, as in. But I have this life. I have it in this life. I have it in this life. But then I've lost this. Everything that goes after. Pero I have this. I tried to hold on to my life here. Then, not realizing I actually lost. Because the rest of eternity, I have nothing. So you can opt not to count the cost. You can. But then again, you'd lose everything. A quick example, these guys. The guy in the middle, his name is Jim Elliot. They were missionaries in the early 1950s, missionaries to Ecuador. These 5 guys, they all died. In less than a year of going there, they would visit, they would use a plane, they would land in Ecuador, they would visit the Warani people. So they're like an indigenous tribe. They spent at least 7 years of just, preparing, studying. Yeah. Graduate ito sa Wheaton College. Finally, when they got there, on their second time na pumunta sila, tapos initially they spent, 5 tribesmen came to them. So it was good. The second time they came, 10 tribesmen came. And as Jim Elliot and one of the other guys went forward, they were immediately killed by these 10 tribesmen. Sobrang tragic, parang what? Ano ba naman to? And they already knew the costs coming in. They were called the Oka. They were headhunters. They were cannibals. Yun yung tawag. So this was like the Oka outreach. And they gave up their lives in order to do that. You know what happened? The wives took it on. The wives came after. And they were the ones who began to be missionaries, serving with others, that eventually naging fruitful yung ministry dito sa lugar na to. Eventually, may redemption. But this guy, Jim Elliot, had this to say, bago nangyari yung mga bagay na. He said, he is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot have. He is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot lose. That which he cannot lose. And that's life eternal. You might give up things in this life, but you're no fool. You're no fool because you would have gained this, the rest of eternity. Then Jesus would give another contrast. He'd say, for what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself? What does it profit you? Diba, ang profit meaning in and out. So, let's say, ang in ko is 100,000, ang out ko is 50,000. So I spent 50,000 as an investment, but what came in is 100,000. That means I have 50,000 profit, right? Profit means gain. What will it profit you if you do gain the whole world? Whole world, you got them all. But then you forfeit your life after. It means that, ito yung nangyari sa'yo. Ang pinili mo, di ba, pera o bayong? Pinili mo pera o bayong? Ang pinili mo pera, hindi mo alam yung nasa bayong, eternal life, which is like worth a gazillion times more than the money that you actually choose. But you chose wrong. We can opt not to count the cost. We can. But you literally are choosing what you should not choose. You're choosing something way less than what is in store for you. What gain would you have? Let me read from 1 John. Itong passage na to, pakinggan nyo lang. I'm going to read it slowly. This is in 1 John 2 that talks about love for the world. I'm not going to explain it, but I pray that the Lord would speak to you. 1 John 2:15. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, and the desires of the eyes, and pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world is passing away along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God abides forever. When it comes to the whole idea of following Jesus, a major thing that would prevent you from following Jesus would be other directions. Other directions. So, when you think about the idea that, Lord, I need to follow you for all of my days. God, I want to follow you for all of my days. This passage, this part of the passage. Follow me. So if this is Jesus, and He's the direction, and then I would choose to go to the left or to the right, that would not be following Him. I can get distracted. Again, now, question. Is distraction... What are the common distractions of our lives? I'd call it the idolatries of my heart. The idolatries of my heart. What are things in my life that sort of redirect me to the left or to the right, the things that draw me in. Now, in the Old Testament, the idolatries of their day were literally worshiping the sun, the moon, or specific idols, statues. In our day, you may not necessarily be worshiping statues, but there are certain things that draw your heart. The lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. The lust of the eyes, oh, the things that are better, shinier. I want a bigger house. I want a nicer car. I want new clothes. I want this and that, and just the lust of the eyes. All the things that you see, commercialism and so on. The lust of the flesh. Oh, I want this particular, sexual relationship. Oh, I want this particular type of food. I want this comfort and this convenience. The lust of the flesh. And then the pride of life. Oh, I want acclaim. I want to be famous. I want to get that promotion. I want to make sure I'm the most honored among them. I want to be the most honored among my batch when we do reunions together. I want to keep all of that. The pride of life. Because all of those are distractions. And you know immediately that your heart shifts either to the left or to the right when we are drawn by them. Alam nyo, tayo po, we're easily distracted. We're in a generation that's easily distracted. Dati ang attention span ay nakaakma sa edad. For example, if you're a 10-year-old, your attention span, 10 minutes. When you're a 20-year-old, your attention span, 20 minutes. You're a 30-year-old, your attention span, 30 minutes. So you could actually sit in a lecture and just continue to, be there. Ngayon, our attention span is now in seconds. Seconds, when you're... If in the next 2 to 3 seconds, hindi ka natuwa dun sa video, it goes up. Bye-bye, video. Okay, if you didn't catch me in the first 2 to 3 seconds, my attention span is lost. I'll just move on to the next one. Which is why it's so easy. It's not just about our eyes, it's about our hearts now. What distracts your heart? What is the attention span of your heart towards Jesus? Will you be willing to follow Him for the rest of your days? Or will it only be lasting for a month? Will it only be lasting for 2 weeks? Would you really let yourself be distracted by the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life? Or will you choose? Will you choose to deny yourself, take up your cross daily, and then strongly, consistently, persistently stay in one direction and follow Jesus alone? That's the cost all of us will need to count. Let me just conclude with the last one. It says, therefore, whoever is ashamed of me and my words, of him will the Son of Man be ashamed when he comes. I can choose to deny Jesus now. I will be denied by Him later. I can choose to not deny Jesus now. He will not deny me later. Up to you which particular path you'd like to choose.